My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. On today's episode, I talk to Owen Kerr. We talk about game therapy, powered by the apocalypse, and then have a very long discussion about emergent play. And Owen gives a bunch of examples on kind of how to do this. So I think this is going to be really helpful for game masters who are looking to improv a little bit, and also to just figure out what the next steps of their stories are. Before we jump into the episode, I just want to thank all of my listeners and give you a few ways that you can help support the podcast. The first way is just by listening to the episode, so congratulations, you're already helping me out. You can also interact with the podcast in any way, like share, all of the usual things. That also greatly helps me out, and it's super easy to do. The next way you can help is by interacting with the community, hanging out in the Discord server, playing or running games on the server, or joining in our design contests that we run. The third way you can help is by being interviewed or letting somebody else know that they should get on the show. All you got to do is contact me via Discord or Twitter or wherever, and we'll get some time scheduled to get you in on an episode. If you're still looking for ways to support the show, you can always use one of the affiliate links in the show notes for any of the RPGs or books that are mentioned. They link to either Amazon or DriveThruRPG, and if you make a sale for anything on one of those sites after using a link, then I get a small percentage of the sales. That's a great way to support the show while also getting something for yourself. And finally, the last way is you can support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee. I will have links in the show notes on where to go for that. And that's just a simple monthly donation to help fund future design competitions and equipment purchases and stuff like that. Thank you again to all of my listeners. I feel like we've been growing a really awesome community here around tabletop role-playing games. And with that, let's jump into the episode. Welcome, everybody. Today I have Owen Kerr with me, writer, pro GM, and indie game designer. Welcome, Owen.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, Brock.
Yeah, glad to have you. Owen, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the tabletop role-playing hobby?
Well, a long time ago, back in the late Bronze Age, there was a science fiction book club. And as an avid reader, one of the things that popped up on my next up list was a book called Fantasy Wargaming by Bruce Galloway. The subtitle is The Highest Level of All. And I, of course, had been playing games since I was a kid, and I'd never heard of wargaming, fantasy, or otherwise. So, of course, I got this book. And it's brilliant as far as a take on medieval history, theology, their attitudes about magic and the church and whatnot. It also had a complete role-playing game and a complete tabletop war game built into it. The role-playing game was completely unplayable, though I didn't know it at the time. I was just fascinated. The war game was a little less clunky, but I've literally been mining this book for ideas since the 80s. The funny thing about it is it mentioned Dungeons and Dragons, which I'd heard some vague bells about, but it talked about how Dungeons and Dragons was in many ways unsatisfactory. So now I wanted to know all I could about that. Bumped into some people in junior high and high school who were also gamers. We rolled a lot of dice, played a lot of different systems, and really never looked back. My experiences have been modified heavily because when I got to college, I got involved with the Society for Creative Anachronisms. And I started learning how and eventually teaching light weapons combat. So I learned a little bit more about, how does armor really work? How do weapons really work? What's an advantage? What's a disadvantage? What is initiative? Taking my history of England classes, I was a theater major, but took a lot of history classes. And looking into things like strategy and tactics and whatnot. So I had a lot of wide and varied inputs into the whole idea of what it is to play a game and what it is to role play. So I know my experiences weren't weren't typical.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got quite the background then in like medieval history and that sort of thing.
A little bit more than some. Again, I'm not an expert, but then of course I was a big reader, so I'm reading all the Tolkien and Raymond Feist, Fritz Leiber, Michael Moorcock. If you ever want to know about law and good and chaos and evil, Michael Moorcock is where old Gary stole most of his ideas. Um, so it's been kind of a wild ride. I also was a teacher for 12 years, and I started game clubs at every school where I taught, including my alma mater. I restarted the game club that we had started at my high school back in my teens. I restarted it back in 2015. Um, so it's been very satisfying to me to introduce new players to the hobby, to get them focused, get them interested, and show them a wide variety of things that they can play. And with the indie games renaissance, it's just anything you want to anything you want to run, anything you want to play, any avenues you want to explore, they're out there, and there's a game designed for it. My most current focus is there are some therapy groups. There's some doctors who are doing um, game game therapy, wherein their clients will go and play some role playing games and explore some of the avenues that they're exploring in therapy. The GM takes that information back to the doctor and says, patient X is doing X, Y, and Z. Maybe you want to talk about that, which is fascinating to me. Because the idea that something that I've been doing for out of love and as a hobby for 30 plus years is actually going to be able to help somebody, work through some issues and some struggles. That's again, as a teacher, somebody who wants to nurture um, the people around me and help them to grow. That really makes me happy that people are doing this, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I haven't seen. I've seen that games can be used kind of as therapy
Mhm,
or kind of in tandem with it, but I haven't necessarily seen it like in practice, I guess.
mhm, mhm.
But I would be very interested in seeing that. Just aside from the regular ways that gaming can be, help you to relax and de-stress and all those other things.
Right, right.
Do you have like a certain game or system that you are drawn to specifically that you play a lot of, or do you kind of with the indie games do you tend to play a lot of different games?
Um, well, I'm going to answer that two different ways. One, there's a system that I am drawn to, because I appreciate the philosophy of it, and we can talk about the philosophy of systems here in a minute if you want to. Basically, I like the Powered by Apocalypse system. Powered by the Apocalypse absolutely blew my doors off the first time I saw it. I encountered it online, since Vincent Baker was releasing the character sheets for free, and I picked it up and I said 90% of the system is built into the character sheet. You can see exactly what your players can do. You can see exactly what your character can do, and the growth mechanics are built right in. And it was just a two pager front and back, And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then the focus of PBTA is always on relationships. It's always on relationships between the characters, how they interact, how they're interacting with their environment. I love that the GM doesn't roll any dice, um, because it's this isn't my story. This is all of our stories, and I love how anytime anyone picks up the dice, something happens. Also, so many of the since Vince is great. If you're unfamiliar with the PBTA, he basically said, "Hey, folks, yeah, I know I won all the awards for this indie game. Do whatever the hell you want with the rules. Okay, just somewhere in there, just put a little block of text that says, yeah, Vince Baker and the fam came up with this, and then do what you want with it." So, of course, there was the obvious explosion of PBTA titles, some of which are
Yeah.
really spectacular. But I love the one I bumped into was experiences through failure. And as a math teacher, as an English teacher, it's like, oh wait, you're getting experience by failing. Well, all of the education classes will tell you that's exactly when the learning happens. It's not when you get everything the first time. It's when you try something that doesn't work. And so I fell in love with that mechanic. And between the player interaction mechanics and the fail forward and the just because you fail the narrative doesn't stop, um absolutely fell head over heels. And the other thing I like about PBTA is I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm too old to learn a new system. I just, a friend of mine, again, I was running the game club, and a friend of mine says, "Hey, I've got an extra copy of Dungeon Crawl Classics." And I said, "Oh, send it to me." And it's a paperweight. It's about half the size of a dictionary. And I looked at it and I said, I am never going to be able to get through this book. I'm never going to give this to a student and say, here, you need to learn this. I made it available for all my students if they wanted to explore new stuff. But it's like I don't have time. I've got a family, I've got, school, I've got all this other stuff. I don't have time to learn a new system. But since PBTA is all, basically cut from the same cloth, and really the only thing that you have to learn in a new game is a new setting or maybe a couple of new rules, quirks, it's the same thing plus. So typically I'll steer new players toward PBTA also because it's so easy to pick up. 5 minutes to come up with a character, 10 minutes maybe to explore the rules, or we can just jump in and you can try stuff. And I love that my new players pick it up instantly. They just soak it up like a sponge. And my veteran players, once they realize that the sky's the limit, they can literally try anything. And if it doesn't fall under a move, if you don't have to say no, why not just say yes? And if it does fall under a move, you roll some dice. If the dice don't go your way, some interesting thing happens to your character, and we keep going, and the story progresses. So yeah, I would have to say the PBTA. I have a fondness for the Blades in the Dark, the Forged in the Dark offshoot of that. Shares a lot of the same DNA as PBTA. My heart of hearts is with a game called Band of Blades. Very, very grim, dark military musket fantasy. Fighting a rearguard action with your mercenary company against the oncoming hordes of undead. Um, because I was a huge fan of Glenn Cook and his Black Company series, and an episodic military uh, military fantasy that's got a grim cast to it really makes me happy. But I don't insist. I know that one's not for everybody. But anytime I can talk someone into playing it with me, I really enjoy it.
I also really enjoy a lot of the things that the Powered by the Apocalypse games do, and the Forged in the Dark,
Hmm.
especially the failure mechanics and
Hmm.
just the partial success. And like you
Oh
said,
yeah,
every roll is you're doing something in the narrative. The narrative never stops. It's
yeah.
always something is happening.
Yes, it's beautiful, and it's beautiful. My players, when I was running games at the schools, every now and again, other teachers would find out that I was running a game, and we're all geeks, and so they'd show up and say, "Hey, can I play in your game?" And everybody learned very quickly, that failure mechanic. You're like, well, this bad thing could happen, or this bad thing could happen, or and you could hear the capital letters, something interesting happens. And every single player I've ever had is like, why don't you just make up something interesting that happens? And because it usually is very painful to the PC, but very entertaining to the party. Um, so that could be a really good time. Remind me to tell you about the time my player failed 17 rolls in a row, though. That was really educational.
One of the other things that I like about a lot of the moves in the Powered by the Apocalypse games is that they often do give the player a choice between what bad thing happens, depending on how well they roll.
Exactly. And I'm, as again, a huge fan of player agency, since that's, baked into the system, well, what do you want to have happen? You know, if it's going well, how does it go well? If it's going marginally, what negative consequences do you think you can survive? Did you drop the rope? You made it up the cliff, but you dropped the rope? Did the rope get cut? There's no way back. What's your choice on that? The other thing I like that's baked into the system is the GM doesn't have to make all the decisions. All right. When the players say, "Hey, so what's the king like?" And you're just, it's been a long night. You're like, I don't know. What's the king like? And they get that look in their eye and they're like, "Oh, he's skinny. He's this tall, skinny guy. And he eats like a horse. Nobody can really, and he's not sick, but he eats all the time and he's really skinny and he really likes books." Oh, okay, cool. And you make a few notes and you run with that. Put in some plot hooks based on the fact that he likes food and likes books. Okay, cool. My best story about that was playing with a junior high school crew. One of the kids, new kid, he had never even heard of role playing games before. And, he'd never played any of the RPG video games or whatever. I don't know why. But I was running him through a very, very basic scenario, and they ran into some goblins, and he was like the ranger or the scout or something. And he's like, "Ooh, what are goblins like?" I said, "I don't know. What are goblins like?" And he sits up and they're rich. Are they really? And I'm taking notes. Why are they rich? Because they trade. They're merchants. They're merchants and traders. They trade. Oh, okay. And I'm taking a few notes. And in my head, these little goblins, spears and teeth, went from nasty little green skinned guys who will murder you to just folks. And in my head, the city, they were down in the sewers, the city in my head went lump, and now there's the Goblin Quarter, and everybody's got their favorite like goblin restaurant. Oh, have you been down to Globnar's? Oh my gosh, roasted rat. Everybody said, "Hey, those boots look pretty nasty. Why? There's a goblin shoemaker right down the road. He'll set you up." Okay, so the party jumps out to attack the goblins, and the goblins are like, "Well, call a cop. What are you doing? Stop it!" The guard, and they're like, "What?" It's like, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, we're lost. Can you help us find a way out?" And the party's like, "Oh, yeah, you go that way." So instantaneously, goblins became just folks, which was funny because in a later game, I had a more experienced crew. A later game, I'm like, I'm going to surprise them. Goblins are going to be just folks, and they bump into this character, Grishnach, one of my reoccurring NPCs. I love Grishnach. He's this little he's taller and better spoken than Yoda, but he is a wise little guy. And they're like, "Oh, excuse me, gentlemen, we're lost down here in the sewers. Could you help us find a way out?" They're like, "Sure." And they asked a few questions about goblins, and they go off and they do all sorts of adventures and stuff. And I'm thinking, just kicking in, and again, I haven't planned any of this. I'm kicking it over in my head. I've been reading Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, and I'm like, okay, dwarves and goblins and elves and fairies, as far as the Norse were concerned, are all the same thing. So if goblins are just a different kind of fairy, why are they here? And I was like, okay, I'll think about that later. They're off doing stuff and fighting the gnolls, and they're headed back. And I'm like, why are the goblins here? They cut themselves off from fairy. Why? I don't know. I'll think about it later. So gaming. And one of the big pivot points in my campaign was we had a paladin of the local goddess. I wanted the local holy mother to be assassinated. Okay. The Pope equivalent of this goddess to be assassinated. And I didn't really know why, because again, play to find out what happens. I was like, "Oh, the Holy Mother got assassinated." Paladin is beside himself. He's like, "Well, we'll talk to the goddess. We've got priests who can talk to the goddess. We'll ask her who murdered the Holy Mother. She won't tell you." What? Yeah, all the divination, zero information, and the goddess says, "No, she's fine. She's right here at my right hand. She served me well, servant. She's happy. Stop asking." And the paladin, again, now is about to bleed out of both eyes. And he's like, "We're going to find the murderer. We're going to find," and I don't even know who did it. Okay. Brock, I don't even know who did it. So I'm trying to make some stuff up. And they keep coming back, and goblins keep coming up and keep coming up. And I'm like, why would the goblins have murdered the Holy Mother? That doesn't make any sense. Well, why did they escape from fairy? Well, Oh, they were slaves. Oh, they were slaves in fairy. Oh, okay. Well, how did they get out? Well, they did a ritual and they like came to this side and they cut themselves off. Well, how are they slaves? I mean, they're powerful. They were used to be really powerful magically. Somebody had a ring of goblin control. Ooh, the Earl King, the King of Fairy. He had a ring of goblin control and he had slaved them and just crushed them. And they're like, no, we'll never be slaves again. And they stole the ring and they fled across to reality and they cut off their ties to fairy and they threw the ring in the ocean. And of course, magical rings like to be found. So now it ended up in the Holy Mother's official gear. You know, there's the staff of plenty and there's the ring of this and the crown of that. And when the goblins showed up in reality, they sent a minor little delegation to the color. We can't tell her she's got a ring of goblin control or we'll be enslaved again. And this is another one of those we will never. And old Grishnak, the character, the NPC that they had bumped into in literally their first adventure, he ran a tea shop and he always said, hey, come on in for some tea. And they've been in Grishnak's tea shop like 100 times. And they come in and they're like, and the paladin's like, Grishnak, we need to know everything you know about the murder of the Holy Mother. And old Grish sets down the teapot very carefully. And he turns around and he tells them this story. He tells them the story of this enslavement. And he said, there was this young, impressionable goblin that was trained up and he served the goddess to the best of his ability. And he got higher and higher in her esteem until one day she said, I'll grant you a boon, my child. And he said, can we kill the Holy Mother? And explained it. And the goddess said, okay. and again, the party is getting more and more and more tense. And old Grishnak opens up his robe and tattooed to his chest is the most exquisite holy symbol to the goddess. He said, I was that goblin. And yes, I killed her. And he looks the paladin right in the eye and says, stand down, sir. I outrank you. The party lost their minds, okay? And again, this all emerged from play. This all emerged from questions. Because I couldn't have planned that. Come on. I'm not that good. I couldn't have planned all that. I'm just like, this keeps coming up, bubble, 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 and just, let it churn. So from a offhand comment by a 7th grader 12 years ago, goblins are folks. Here's Grishnak. I love Grishnak. Let's bring him back. Bubble, bubble. I want this event to happen, but I don't know anything of the surrounding. And just let the players do stuff and ask questions. And as they ask questions, I'm answering them. And I'm like, okay, it seems like we have an answer here. But and I love that that's baked into the system. Because anytime a player, you've had this player, the paranoid one, they're doing whatever. Yeah. And we were playing and my buddy was like, oh my God. And everybody looks at him. What is it? It's the prince. What? The prince is behind all this. The prince hired us to find out what. No, it was, remember the hobgoblins and the dagger and the dragon poop. And he had come up with this elaborate conspiracy theory about how the prince is behind this. And no, that prince was not behind it, but that was a much better idea than the one I had planned. So I'm taking notes and they're looking at me. I'm like, maybe. And so, and I've told other GMs this, I was like, take your players' paranoia and run with it. Okay. Because if they come up with a better plot than you have, which they will, just run with it. And here's the cool part. If you give them 90% back of what they gave you, you find half of a uniform, like the uniform pants. What color? They're purple. The prince's guard wears purple pants. Well, yeah, that's true. It's like, oh gosh, and then they think they're right, and they're patting themselves on the back. And then when you put in that sudden surprise twist at the end, it wasn't the prince. You've got the prince surrounded. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the queen and her guards come in. It's like, seize them, the fools. Oh gosh, it was the queen the whole time. We are fooled, but they were right the whole time. And they just, it's amazing when you can feed them back their own plot line with some twists and curves to it, and it's amazing.
The paranoid player is so common to have somebody that's just spilling like, I think it's this, I think this is happening. What if this was the case? And then oftentimes as the GM, it's like, You're just trying to not smirk too big.
Exactly.
They're
Exactly.
just
And they don't
spitting
even have
stuff
to be
out.
paranoid. They don't even have to be paranoid. They just have to be one of those people who thinks out loud, and they're like, "Huh, we just got in here, and the dragon isn't here. Maybe the dragon's like got a different lair someplace." You're like, "Different lair, dragon. This is maybe this is like a decoy lair. Oh, decoy lair. This is decoy lair. They're going to find traps." It's just like even if they're just thinking out loud, it's amazing. And again, it's that whole one of the things I'd strongly suggest for anybody who really, really wants to dig into the whole GM thing, take some improv classes. Even just watching some YouTube stuff on how to do improv, because we had to do that in my classes when I was going to ASU. And when you get used to taking, in the moment, taking the information that you're getting from another person, you're like, "Oh, officer, I'm so glad you're here. Okay, I'm a police officer now. I'm investigating. So what seems to be the problem, ma'am? Oh, mice have stolen my slippers. Okay, I've got to deal with stolen slippers. Are you sure it's the mice? Well, yes. Okay." And the whole giving back and giving back and giving back and saying yes and saying yes. Somebody on TikTok was asking, "Are you a adversarial GM or are you an advocate GM?" And I have to say, if it's a spectrum, and it probably is, I'm very, very much a player advocate. Okay, I love it when a player comes up with an interesting character that's got some flaws, that's got some room for growth and potential, and just runs with it. And I like to give them opportunities to shine and opportunities to improve. But some of my best games are based on some like serious flaws in the character. I ran a Middle Earth campaign for 4 years every Friday, and one of my players, he's like, "I'd like to play, but I don't know anything about Middle Earth." And I said, "That's okay. You can play a character that doesn't know anything, that doesn't have any not like an elf who's got a 10,000 year history. You can play one of these, I don't know, Hillman. You can play a Dunlending." He's like, "Okay." And my other buddy, who was basically a Tolkien scholar, he played the big elf. And so they hooked up. And anytime he was like, "Well, we could go to Austin Ethel." And the one character would be like, "What's an Austin Ethel?" And I'd be like, "Okay, take it away." And the elf would explain to him, "I don't know this stuff." It's like, "Well, Austin Ethel was a city that blah, 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 blah." And he's like, "Oh, okay, let's do that." So I didn't have to do any of that, setting lore, any of that, nothing. And again, he was great. That character was great because, I threw like the equivalent of like a +1 dagger at the party, and the elf gets a hold of it, and he's like, "Oh, what's the design?" I said, "It's obviously elvish work." He's like, "Oh my gosh, this could be a blade from Nargothrond." I'm like, "Maybe Nargothrond, Narg," and it was this dumb little +1 dagger. That was it, but it became this elf character's absolute prize possession. He would have lost his left arm before he had given up this little piece of his history. And again, I couldn't have made that up, but when I saw when the player showed me how important it was to the character, it's like, of course, yeah, of course it is. Yeah, why would you ever say no to that? "No, dummy, it's just a +1 dagger. Just don't have a hemorrhage here, dude." No, no, oh no, oh, and it's got the is that mithril inlay on that? Oh, he would have like slapped his mom for this dagger. It was just amazing. Again, to take what they give you and give it back, and they don't seem to recognize it.
I really like the elf player giving the other one the history.
Oh,
It's almost like you had like in TV shows and in books and stuff. A lot of
right,
times you'll have like the one character that understands everything, and then they're
right,
just telling them so that the audience can get it. But just
exactly.
in a
Exactly,
in
and
a
it was great.
game.
Yeah, Dunkad of Clan Dunkad was the everyman character, and he gets introduced to well, this is Elrond, and I think he was a bard. He's like, "This is Elrond. He's the master of the last homely house," and he's like, "Hey, Elrond, I've been learning some songs in Elvish. Would you like to hear one?" And, "Oh, yes, of course," being, genteel. "Yes, oh, of course, I'd love to hear a song from you, primitive, short-lived human." And he whips out the Lay of the Helcaraxa, where the elves crossed the grinding ice and thousands died coming back to persecute the war against Melkor. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm looking at my other player, my elf player, and I'm like, Elrond walked across the Helcarax, so didn't he? Elrond was there. Okay, you've just done the song of the sinking of the Titanic, and you're singing it to Molly Brown. Okay, she lived this, and it's like, oh, Elrond has to take a moment. He's going to have a little bit of a lie down, and try not to commit homicide. But I mean, fun times were had by all. And yeah, again, having the character that knows nothing was it was a perfect storm. Having the player that knows, has read all 13 books of unfinished tales, and the player who literally knows nothing about the lore was really educational. Because again, a third of the time I could just sit back and let him go. Take it away. You have the floor. So yeah. They and players will surprise you, usually in positive ways. And I learned that on a number of different arenas. I used to teach geometry, and one of the assignments I gave was make me a 12-sider, and I'd give them a pattern for a 12-sided object. It basically looked like a 12-sided die, and they were surprised. I mean, one wanted to make it out of like cardboard and didn't have it. I said, "Where's your project?" They said, "I'm hot gluing it together at home." I'm like, "Oh, check out crafty Joe here. Okay, just bring it in." And they're doing this and doing this and doing this. And one of my students, who is a welding student, not the greatest geometrician in the world, comes in with a solid steel 12-sider, the size of a fist, and he sets it on my desk. And he says, "Is that good for extra credit?" I said, "No, that's an A+ right there." He had welded it together and he polished it. And I was like, I could never have asked you to do this, but you did it. And this took some, I mean, it wasn't like perfect or anything, but it was the best thing I'd ever gotten out of a student before, especially a marginal one. And of course, the following year, one of my other welding students saw it and thought that was cool and made me another one. So I've got a set. And I can kill you with them from a distance. If I dropped them on you from a height, that would be purely lethal. But it's just like, this is amazing, And it's the same way with your players. If you give them some parameters and let them go nuts, they're going to give you some amazing gameplay. And it gets back to that whole play to find out what happens. And if I had any tips to a GM, especially a new one, I'd say you don't have to know everything that's going to happen. You don't. You can have some ideas. You can have some what do they call it in Apocalypse World? Some off-screen badness. You can have an idea. Okay, you've got the little village, and there's the bandits, and there's the dragon, and there's the goblins, or whatever. You can have those ideas, and you can say, okay, these bad things are going to happen if nobody intervenes. But you don't have to know all the specifics. And then again, if you give your players, the gaming equivalent of some like some simple coloring pages. Here's a character you like. Why don't you color this one? Oh, I'm going to curlicue in the corners, and I'm going to doodle. I'm going to add this in. Yeah, please do. And then give it back, and we'll all enjoy it. Here's this map. Oh, where are you from? My people are from a very poor duchy. Oh, okay. Poor. So I'm like, poor. What's poor? Usually rocky, mountainous, that sort of thing. I said, what do you export? They're mostly mercenaries. Oh, okay. So I'm talking Highlanders, I'm talking Sikhs, I'm talking Gurkhas. Okay, so tell me about that. Well, I was my father was a general, and I was being trained up to be an officer, but I pissed him off and I left, and now he's got people looking for me. Fantastic. Let's run with that. So my map, blump, there's the little duchy of whatever that trades in mercenaries, and they will kick your ass, and they're expensive. But okay, when you don't have to know everything, when the map doesn't have to be all filled in to begin with, and you just run with it, you can get some pretty amazing stuff going on. And this is the thing. The kid who had never played role-playing games before, when I said, I don't know, what are goblins like? and he got the input into the story, and it was all incorporated, and everybody's like, yep, that's what he said. He said that goblins are like this, and that's how it is. He came back the next week, and the week after that, and the week after that, because this wasn't my story. This was his story, because he told part of it, and everybody listened and nodded their heads very gravely and said, oh, yes, 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 that makes sense. So when you get GMs complaining about, well, sometimes my players show up and sometimes they don't, one always flakes, or I can't get my players to role play, I can't get my players to do X, Y, and Z. A lot of it is giving them the tool set, whether it's in the system or in, emergent gameplay, give them some tools to use. And the first time they try it, say, I'm going to do this. Okay. It works? Yeah. Why not? Oh, okay, I'm going to try some more stuff. Okay. And I learned that actually from one of my first game masters way back in high school. Of course, the eternal game master, all we want to do is play. Okay, please run a game so that we can play. Please. He said, could you run a game for me? And I'm like, okay, cool. And he came up with this an elf fighter, maybe elf ranger, and he wore a soft leather jacket, fedora, and carried a bullwhip. Okay. And his elvish name was almost unpronounceable, but he insisted that everyone call him Jones. I'm like, oh, I see where this one's going. Okay, so Jones and his sidekicks are bobbing around and they're doing this and that. And they get captured by hobgoblins, and the hobgoblins are going to eat this elf. And he says, you shouldn't mess with me. You've probably heard of me. I'm Jones. And I said, oh, yeah, puny. Everybody says they're Jones. And he says, but can everybody do this? And I said, do what? He said, you see that pine cone? And I'm like, I did not know that we were in a coniferous forest, sir. But you're obviously going somewhere with this. So, yeah, pine cone right there. He said, I'm going to whip out my whip and just nail that pine cone and then have it coiled and the whip back at my belt. I'm like, roll. And of course, that was the time he pulled out the natural 20. The pine cone explodes over the hobgoblin's head, and the whip is back, curled at his side. And they all kind of look at each other and give a little golf clap. Okay, okay. He said he was Jones. Okay. So, so this group of hobgoblins became kind of these recurring NPCs. They're like, okay, hey, Jones, we're not going to mess with you. Have a nice day. Don't hurt us, don't kill us, and we'll just be over here, running away. And so every now and again, the hobgoblins would show up, and they'd be like, Jones, get in the bushes. No, shh. And the dragon flies overhead, and Jones is like, what did you do? Nothing. What did you do? We've irritated a dragon. Now you're going to have to deal with it. So, but again, emergent gameplay. I didn't know he was going to do that. But if, as a GM, if you trust your players, because they got to trust you, they got to trust you to give them cool things to do and to not just like murder them straight up. Because we could, rocks fall, everybody dies. They got to trust you. You got to trust them too. And that's one of the things I see about a lot of these GMs is like, yeah, I was running my party through this adventure. Like there was a woman on TikTok. She said I was running Curse of Strahd, and they didn't want to do that. I pitched them the idea, and the Ravenloft and this and this. And as soon as they found out which direction Strahd's castle was, they turned and headed the other direction. And she's all depressed about it. She's like, they're doing all these other things, and everybody seems to be enjoying the game but me. And she had to stitch this, and I said, well, respectfully, are you a bigger fan of the player characters, or are you a bigger fan of your own preconceived notions of what the plot is going to be? Okay, and until you answer that question, there really isn't any advice to give you, because if you're a bigger fan of the characters, follow them around, and any direction that they go, give them something interesting and painful to interact with. If you're a bigger fan of your own plot line, then you are going to have to incentivize the players to do the things that you kind of hope that you wanted them to do. And I said, I'm biased. I know which way I would go, honestly. And because I'm not that big a fan of railroading. The line is, if your campaign has come off the rails, that means at one point it was on rails. So you might discuss that. They can't go completely crazy if you didn't kind of already have an idea, a preconceived notion of what they were going to do.
You're not a fan of like railroading and stuff.
I am really curious what you do for prep, both for like a campaign that you're going to run, and then also just like session to session. What does that look like?
Um, well, let's take three big steps back. When I was running Middle Earth, one of the things that I love most about the Middle Earth campaigns from Iron Crown Enterprises is they gave you the map, a really detailed map, and they gave you 4 or 5 points of interest on the map. Okay, so there's problems with the hill folk, and there's problems with the trolls, and there's this dragon over here, and then there's like these elven like scientists slash wizards. They're up in the mountains. So anyway they go, anyway they wander around this space, they're going to interact with somebody. And this meshed in really nicely with the idea in some of the PBTA games of fronts. Okay. You don't have a plot line, you have a problem that's going to get worse. Okay. So if you've got the Dunlending tribes are getting crazy, there's going to be a civil war. That's a front. You got the dragon that's looking to expand his territory. That's a front. And then if you have a kind of an idea of 3 or 4 or 5 things that are going to escalate if you don't run them down, and then you can kind of organically follow the party. It's just like, oh, what happened to our village? Oh, the hillmen showed up and they razed it, they leveled it. What? Yeah, you'd heard all those rumors about the Civil War. I guess it spilled over. Oh, geez, we got to go and deal with that. Yeah, you kind of do. Um, so, um, so I really fell in love with the idea of fronts because then your prep is just you don't have to write the dialogue. You don't have to write chapter, line, and verse. You have to write down that one good idea you had and then logically progress it in a bad way. So when one of my parties there were things coming up out of the sewers like undead, and that was just my idea. Undead are coming up out of the sewers, and I thought, why would that be? And I didn't know, and I'm like, okay, something is happening. Long story short, it turned out there was a gate to hell, gate to inferno, that had been sealed, and the way it had been sealed is they had bound an angel to it as a living guardian. Okay, and what was happening is one of the Dukes of Hell would come and visit the angel every now and again, and hasn't like turned him to the dark side, but has made him really, really, really lonely. He's like, gosh, it must have been really nice in paradise, wasn't it? Yeah, it must have been really beautiful. Gosh, I remember when I was an angel, man, so pretty up there in paradise. Anyway, would you care to play some chess? It's your move. And so the angel has just been desperate. He doesn't, he'd never turn his back on his duty, and he's bound here. But he really, really, really wants to go home, and he hasn't been paying attention. And like minor evil spirits have been like seeping through the gate and inhabiting bodies and whatnot. So I'm like, okay, that's where we're going to start, and we'll just see where it goes from there. When I had the orc king, there's an orc warlord. I'm like, I don't want the orc warlord to be stereotypical. I want him. He's got a problem. I don't know what his problem is, but he's raising an army, but he wants to raise it right. So the party shows up in the village, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, the orcs were just here. Oh, did they burn everything? No. What? Yeah, they came in, and they're like, we need to see your like able-bodied people, all of them." And they took them. Oh my gosh, they took all the able-bodied. No, they took like a third of them. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, they like lined everybody up and were like, hey, this guy and this lady and stuff. And they took our stuff. Oh, they took all your stuff? No, they took like some of it and gave us money. What? And it basically the warlord was sending out troops to like get recruits and supplies, but he didn't want anybody hating his guts, and he certainly didn't want a rebellion at his back. So he's like, and pay him. Just make sure, yeah. It's like here's money for his service in the fields for the next year, and here's some money for the grain, and load it up in the wagon. We'll go. So the party shows up ready to rock, and they're recruiting. What? Maybe they need to hire us. So they went and they found out what the real problem was and came back. So my prep. Say you and I were going to do a game. I've got a game coming up with some friends here in a bit. My initial prep would be some session 0 stuff to find out about the characters, what at some point. My favorite description of fail forward is lock picking. You roll the dice and you do a complete success. lock comes open, proceed with your narrative. 7 to 9, partial success. Well, maybe you break a few picks, or maybe it takes a lot longer than you thought, so the bad guy gets a little further away, or somebody's coming and you have to just like rush into the room without really checking. Problematic. You have success, but and my favorite with the failure is not the lock stays locked. That's boring. And then you're going to have to make another roll, and you're going to have to make another roll, and it kills the narrative dead. It kills the flow of the story. It's so much more interesting. Oh, I rolled a 4. Oh, no, the lock whispers open. It's somebody oiled it recently. Really? Yeah. Door swings open. You're looking into a room. It's not very big, but it's got a lot of bunk beds. Boy, that's a lot of bunk beds. And foot lockers. Lots of foot lockers. And there are 8 guys at a large table. They appear to be playing dice. And all heads turn slowly to look at you, kneeling in the hallway with a handful of lockpicks. They all have armor and weapons. What do you do? Okay. Now that advances a narrative. Okay. It doesn't stop it dead. And it's like a time to think of, something to do here, thief. And one of the other people on the boards was like, well, does that mean you don't know what's behind the door until they roll? I'm like, kinda, asterisk. If you know that it would make sense to have a guard room around here somewhere, why not have the thief find it accidentally? Isn't that more interesting? If the ranger is out in the woods and you know that there's bears and goblins and pixies and dragons, and he rolls real well on, I'm going to search for tracks. Oh, you find some. Oh my gosh, yeah, bears. Oh, they're all the bears here. I mean, it's like a bear convention. It's crazy. And they're like, oh, geez, we gotta run away from the bears. So, so if you start with a session 0 where you're picking you're taking a real good look at the player characters, that gives you plot hooks. That gives you character hooks. One of the other combos I was having is no culture is monolithic. No culture that we've ever bumped into is monolithic. So why would all dwarves be the same, all elves be the same, all orcs be the same? And then D&D is going berserker. Well, we're going to eliminate racial bonuses, and we're going to eliminate. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I still want to play my orcish berserker. Okay, well, what do the rules look like? It looks like everybody gets like a +2, a +1, a -1, and like some special effects. So tell me about your culture. Oh, we're desert elves, desert dwelling elves. Oh, cool. What's your +2 in? Constitution. Why? Oh, we're tough. We value toughness. I mean, you can be the sun's beaten down, and you've had one mouthful of water in the last 6 days. You got to be tough. Okay, cool. What's your +1 bonus? Charisma. Why? Oh, we're entertainers. We're known, the children of the desert are a beautiful race, and they dance, they sing. Oh, okay, cool. We're like, being able to entertain is like societally very acceptable. Oh, okay, cool. What's your minus? Strength. Why? Well, muscle, raw brawn. Ooh, I can break this with my head. We don't care. Psh, could care less. All right. So what do you want for your special effect? Hey, instead of night vision, can I have like super duper day vision? What do you mean? If I'm staring across like a salt pan, just white and, noon sunlight, I want to be able to see like a hawk, like 2 miles away. That's so much more interesting than night vision. Oh, okay. Cool. And then what happens? If I've got 5 players at my table, I've got 5 different cultures. I've got 5 different locations. I've got 5 different homelands. They're not monolithic, so nobody, oh, that's racist. No, it's not. That's his culture. The desert elves, that's his culture. Now, the elves that live in the hills, like 16 miles, 20, 50 miles away, they are nothing like the desert elves. Nothing. I mean, there's some interrelatedness. But no, it's a completely different culture. So if you say, the kid raised by the dwarves, the human kid raised by the dwarves, thank you, Terry Pratchett, he's going to act like a dwarf. He's going to act like a dwarf culturally. He's going to, he's going to be honest, and he's going to be hardworking, and he's going to have, this and this and this. But then you don't have anything. Nobody can point at you and say that's racist, because it's not. It's cultural, and It's not monolithic. And if all your I've got 7 dwarves in the party. Okay, they're all from completely different clans. Oh, okay, cool. Great. So they're nothing alike, and they probably fight more amongst each other,
Right. Yep.
Scottish Highlanders, so I would prep by talking to my players about their characters, what they want. John Wick with 7th Sea First Edition had his 20 questions that he had the players answer. What is your character's view on religion? What's your character's view about magic? What would their family say about them? Do they have a love interest? Is there somebody they're in love with? Is there something they hate? Um, if they could pick the way they died, how would they do it? And you say that to a paladin, like, oh, I want to be like the last in line at the rear guard, fighting off the hordes while all of my friends escape. And I want them to remember me, weeping into their beer as the one who let them, died so that they might live. That's wonderful, beautiful, amazing. Okay, and even if it doesn't work out that way, in play, that's in the character's head. It's just like, yes, the essence of this character is defense and protection. So give them lots of opportunities to defend stuff and protect stuff. And then, when you get into character motivation, one of the things I like about PBTA is it doesn't have alignment, but it does have motivation goals, which I have stolen liberally from my game. If you got a motivation goal, is your paladin good? Do they protect the innocent? Or are they lawful and they uphold the law? Both of which are valid motivations, but both would cause them to react very differently in the same situation. Or is it to punish the wicked? So you have three paladins, same culture, same religion, same god, with three different, very, very, very different motivational goals. And, now, let the play begin. Another thing that I love about really digging into character concepts, I started being a professional GM beginning of 2000 or 2020, and one of my players, I had players in 9 time zones and 4 continents. One of my players was Irish, and he's like, "Well, is it going to be a difficult coordinating a time slot?" I said, "No, we'll figure it out." He said, "Also, I'm deaf." Oh, what do you normally use for communication? I said, normally we use Discord, but you're going to have to like type stuff. This is not optimal. Let's see. So we kicked it around. And then I found out that Google Meet has got a built-in closed captioning function. And we tried it, and it's very robust. I'm talking, it's printing, he's typing back. And I'm like, okay, great. So it's you're in. Okay, we're going to be playing on Wednesdays. So he shows up
That's
on
awesome.
Wednesdays. Yeah, it gets better, I think. You decide. He shows up on Wednesday, and he's like, I'm going to play a dwarf. I'm like, oh, okay. Hey, is your character hearing or deaf? Oh, he's deaf. I'm like, oh, yeah. Your people, your clan is part of a larger group. Your clan is all profoundly deaf. Your family name translates to Masters of the Forge because you guys don't mind the sound of hammers. Okay. Also, there's DSL, Dwarven Sign Language, and all of the underdeep fighters. Wait. We can communicate perfectly in complete silence while hunting things in the Underdark. Sign me up. Okay. This is the best thing since Betty White. Okay. And they're going, and it's like, oh, and the folks who like deal with your kingdom, most of them sling a little bit of DSL just in case, and like the merchants and the traders. And he's just loving this. He's just, on my private chat, he's like, this, I couldn't have begged, I couldn't have asked for this. This is great. And then the paladin, bless his heart, sweet kid, but somewhere on the spectrum, he's like, my paladin can heal you. And there was a pause. And I said, Pally, your buddy here knows you. He knows your heart's in the right place. But he's got a lot of cousins that would straight up murder you for implying that there was the slightest thing wrong with them. Okay. They are not ill. They are not damaged. This is very much a feature and very much not a bug. Okay. And if you don't want to get hurt, he's like, oh, I never thought of that. And my Irish player afterwards was like, that was something that I had to experience. That's something I didn't expect in gaming. To land on the whole, a disability doesn't mean you're disabled. A disability doesn't mean you're somehow less.
Right.
So I feel like I kind of knocked that one out of the park. But yeah, so again, in when he said my dwarf is deaf, bluff, I've got this entire culture that's going to support that, and an entire group who's taking best advantage of that and using it very, very much to their benefit. So it's just like, but I couldn't have come up with that if you'd be like, hey, Owen, come up with like a unique little take on dwarves. How about death? That wouldn't have crossed my mind. Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe it should have. But the other conversation we had was, why do dwarves have dark vision? Why do they have superior night vision? They shouldn't. They live underground. Things that live underground don't have good night vision. It makes more sense to have good hearing, superior hearing, because if you can hear the bad guys coming. And somebody said, well, if they were minors, that wouldn't be good because it'd hurt their ears. I said, what if they can tell the difference between I just hit a rock and I just hit a rock with some ore in it? They're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And then I said, oh, by the way, creatures with superior night vision are all obligate carnivores. So elves are terrifying. Hi, we live in the trees. We see really well in the dark. We eat you. I'm sorry, you do what? Oh, yes. We could hunt elk, pshaw, or we could invite some stupid humans over for dinner. I was just like, elves should be terrifying. And then the other guy says, well, they could be prey, superior. Some creatures with superior night vision are prey species. I said, congratulations. Now you've got to come up with what's predating on an intelligent race. So you got to find out the monster that's hunting elves, right? Let's go visit the elves. Oh, let's go out in the dark. The elves are like, are you out of your mind? Monsters live in the dark. You're crazy. No. We're going to stay here by the fire. So I was like, examine your preconceptions and go to town on that.
I saw a TikTok earlier today, actually, that was talking about like the physiology of dragons, and like they have massive horns and like armored plates and spikes, and that is most common in prey animals.
Prey species,
that use it for defense. So the only other thing that it really could be is for like displays for like mating and stuff.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so the physiology is telling us that there are things that hunt dragons.
Exactly.
What's scarier than the dragons? And then a lot of people were like, well, I mean, you have adventurers that hunt dragons, and dragons hunt other dragons, and
right.
But it was just kind of an interesting take on the things that we're seeing. You kind of have to, or you don't have to, but if you think about them a little bit more in depth than maybe you're normally looking at it, you can find some neat details there.
Well, somebody made that point about the Tarrasque as well. Tarrasque is covered in spikes. Why? What's going to bite it? It's like, oh, it's a display. They're unique. There's one of them. They don't mate. They don't need to. There's one of them, and it's eternal. Why would it have spikes and plates and horns and stuff? That was fun. No, I've been in I don't know if you watched it, but I've been in an ongoing debate about dragons. And because the question was, why would a dragon land to fight you? And of course, there's no reason for it. A dragon wouldn't. So I said, I got 3 takes on this. The first one is that a dragon will murder you because they're like Batman. If they can't do it themselves, they'll figure out a way to do it. And again, how many boulders would they have to drop on your head from well outside a crossbow range before you just gave up and went home? Sorry, this isn't going to help. And all the little tricks and traps. And it's like you've got a hyper intelligent creature that is an alpha predator of intelligent creatures, who has dozens, if not decades, if not hundreds of years of experience, who wants to live in a massive fortune. If there's a weakness, they've found a way around it, and they'll murder you, and they're going to assess your abilities, and blah blah blah. And I said my second take is, maybe they're curious. They're predators. All predators are curious. And it's, what's that? What's in the tree over there? Can I eat that? And an intelligent predator is, is that somebody that I could like dominate and get it to worship me and get it to do things for me or bring me some money? So, but they're not going to land next to you. They're going to be up on Pride Rock. What are you doing in my land? And maybe they're bored, how much, what's your intelligence? 20? Yes, you're a little less stupid than the rest of these little apes. Do you have any books? I'm terribly bored. Read to me or I'll kill you. Oh, geez. And then The third take was maybe they're the local government. You know, if three quote unquote good dragons got their heads together and like, hey, why don't we kill like the bad dragons and like take over this region and like charge taxes to the little apes? What? Yeah, they bring us food and money every now and again, and yeah, and we'll protect them. Oh, so if the local baron is, Baron Sitherax, who will ruin you if you try to show up on their little village there. Maybe the dragon lands because it's tax time. Have you tithed to me recently? I don't think. Bring me a sheep. I need a sheep right now, please. Yeah, and I've got some people very exercised about that. They're like, no, we killed 17 dragons by the time I was 4th level. I'm like, your GM is not using them to the best of the just all I'm saying.
Definitely not.
Yeah. No wrong fun. No wrong fun. But there are many times when I go, I think I would have done that a little different.
Yeah, I think the one campaign that I was in that we fought a dragon, it was not we were, I don't even remember what level we are, but it was not an easy fight at all.
No. And with the tax dragons, the baron dragons, I said it would be pretty easy for a dragon to come up with the idea of, if I had a rider who knew what he was doing, I could probably outclass a dragon my size that didn't have one. If he had like a big crossbow or a hooked lance or something, I could probably have a tactical advantage if I had a rider. So dragon knights become a possibility. But yeah, I mean, and it's just I love those little like intellectual what ifs, And I terrified my party. They got gated to a different dimension where the dragons were all the government, and they ran afoul of some dragon scientists who are just fascinated by, oh, you're from a different dimension. Oh gosh, and they're all, oh, can we have like a tissue sample? No, I'm using all of it. Are you sure? No, if anything falls off, you can have it. And my players were getting completely freaked out at being like carefully examined by these mega predators, who are very polite, but they're like, you're freaking me out. So, whatever it takes.
You mentioned professional game master, you're a writer, an indie developer a bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you have worked on?
Sure. I started working in game design almost accidentally. I did some work for Steve Jackson Games, published some articles in Pyramid Magazine starting back, I think, in '99. There were 5 or 6 or 8 of those. I bumped into the In Nomine game. Absolutely fell in love with the fluff. The system, again, could use some work, but I absolutely adored the idea of angels and demons in a modern day and a musical motif. So I was playtester on something like, 6 of the In Nomine line. And then wrote some articles. So there was a website called Women in Gaming, and I did a piece there on adapting the works of Laurel K. Hamilton to a gaming environment. And I started doing like little supplements, and when PBTA cooked off, I came up with a swashbuckler playbook that I quite enjoy. And then I wanted an environment for him to live in. So I created a setting that I called L'Emperor's Salon, which is, if you're going to have a dashing, social, swashbuckly character, might as well give him, a drawing room and a ballroom and a, lurching ship to be all, pirate king about. So I came up with that. That's on itch.io and DriveThruRPG. And I keep falling in love with different games. Fiasco is amazing. I have a Fiasco playset that's based on a work by the author Roger Zelazny. The book is called A Night in the Lonesome October. It's one of the best things he ever wrote, and I reread it every October. It's just that good. So I came up with a Fiasco playset based on it. That's on itch as well. And I ran into a game called Dialect. I backed the game Dialect on Kickstarter, and then a friend of mine turned around and bought me the box set of it. Dialect the subtitle is a game about language and how it dies. and it's absolutely amazing. A third of the book is how to play. A third of it is what they call backdrops, which is kind of like settings. And then a third of it is actually about language construction. And I've been studying phonetics and phonics, um, both as an educator and as an actor, for 30 years, because you have to know how the different vowels and consonants work together in the different accents, you see. So when they're talking about, here's some German roots and some Russian suffixes and how everything binds together, I was absolutely in love. So I had to run out and make a backdrop for dialect. And that one's actually a twofer because it's based on the old Twilight 2000 game. The conceit is that you're a little military unit that has lost contact with everybody in this tiny little town in Germany. And then the Russians show up and surrender. And so you're all like, what are we doing in this tiny little German town trying to get along in English, German, and Russian? And so I hope some people pick that one up and have some fun with it. Also, I was writing a supplement for Dungeon World, which happened accidentally. I said to my players, I said, what do you want to play? And they told me. And I said, well, I got this like a fantasy game, but it's like post-apocalyptic fantasy. Like all the gods went to war with all the other gods and demons and fairy kings and Cthulhuids and stuff, and all the magic drained out of the world, except for little pockets here and there. What do you think? And they're like, well, so it's all the fantasy tropes of elves and dwarves and orcs and stuff, but it's also all the post-apocalyptic tropes, dust storms and ash and raiders and clock punk robots and things. I'm like, yeah. They're like, yeah, we'll play the hell out of that. So that originally was going to be a Dungeon World setting with a couple of modifications. And when one of the creators of DW had his public implosion, I talked to a few people that I know in the biz, and they very quietly nodded and said, you probably want to distance yourself from that particular franchise. So I had to turn around and make it into a completely full-blown game, which I like because I got to add a few things in there that I like as far as character interaction. So it's called Splintered Moon. I do have an art-free version of it on itch.io, with the idea that it was supposed to pay for the arted version, and I'd give you a discount on that. I've changed tactics on that, though. I've got the playbooks, the character sheets for Splintered Moon that are going to be going up live probably by the time this broadcast hits the air on the 25th. If not, I'll give you an update on that. But yeah, it's just it's 9 different character playbooks, which are a post-apocalyptic take on classic fantasy character tropes. So I hope folks like them. They're going to be a lot of fun. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is a play kit that incorporates all of them plus some GM advice. And then phase 3 is the full-blown book with art and good layout. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome, and I like that you have kind of a phased approach to it. It seems like a pretty good way to go about that kind of publishing process there.
I hope so. From your mouth to Loki's ears. So,
where can we find you at online?
Online, my presence is slightly growing on TikTok. This time last week, I had, I think, about 600 followers. It was 4 days to 1,000, and currently, I just hit 2,000. Like just now, I just looked at my TikTok. I just hit 2,000. I am at Carpe GMAZ, DARPEGMAZ. You can find me there with some scandalous content about gaming. You can find me on itch.io. The publishing company is Four Horsemen Publishing, and that is you'd probably be best just to look for Four Horsemen Publishing on itch, because the URL is a private joke and it's hard to spell. So that might be best. If you're looking, it's Fallon Spog, FALLONSPAAG .itch.io. But yeah, probably a search for Four Horsemen Publishing would be a little easier.
Awesome. Well, I think we can probably wrap the episode up here. So it was great having you on the show, Owen.
I had an amazing time. Thank you for the invite.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.